History tells us that when a new wave comes, you're either on board and making it to the next, or you're just not. So if history is teaching us anything, it's better to be in that camp than not. And on a little like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it's a little funny for me to drop that, but that's kind of the way that I see it.
Everywhere you turn, there's a new marketing framework. And every day, a new technology gets launched to take advantage of that latest marketing trend. But as a marketer, it's hard to move beyond high-level theories and get work done. And it's getting harder to manage the latest MarTech developments. Creative Operations is a podcast for B2B marketers who want to build a marketing engine and generate revenue. In each episode, you'll learn how to combine your creativity with the right technology and process. We all know marketing works. We just need to explore how. Let's get into the weeds and figure it out together.
Imagine this. You're leading a small marketing team, drowning in new tools and frameworks. Every day, you find out about a new groundbreaking AI platform promising to revolutionize your workflow. But here's the kicker. How do you separate the game changers from the hype? And how do you ensure your team is even ready to integrate these tools without losing sight of your company's marketing goals? For marketers like you, the pressure to adopt AI is constant. Your budgets are scrutinized, you're losing full-time resources, and you have to do more with less. Many marketers find themselves paralyzed, unsure where to begin, or worse, adopting AI too quickly without a strategy. This is where today's guest, Ben Hoehn, comes in. As a fractional VP of marketing and an AI advocate, Ben has helped a number of marketing teams figure out how to adopt AI. In this episode, we'll uncover the concept of AI readiness, a practical framework to assess and prepare your team for AI integration. Ben will share insights on creating an AI policy, understanding ethical considerations, and implementing tools that genuinely enhance your productivity. If you're wondering if your team is ready for AI and how to work it into your team the right way, then this will be a good conversation. Can you compare how AI compares to other big phases of technology?
I always think about it in the sense of what I lived through, right? There's kind of the three phases, which the first was the advent of the internet. I'm not old to remember a pre-internet day where it was just ubiquitous, right? I mean, the internet outdates me, of course, but there were people that had internet and didn't have internet and had access to like some seemingly secret world. This is before everyone had, the capability to just jump online at whim. But there were simply people that were just like, no, I'm not going to mess with it. I'm afraid of it. I don't want anything to do with it. You and your nerds can have these secret little websites and whatever you're doing up there. And from there, it developed kind of this whole two sides of people that were online and people that were online. Now, obviously, most people ended up migrating over, but there's still holdouts there that decided to say, no, I'm not going to adapt that, or that's my line in the sand that I'm just not going to cross. And that's too much technology for me. So AI is kind of there as well. A lot of people I speak with that aren't in tech are legit on that other side of the line. They're like, no, I'm not messing with AI, or no, it's coming for this or that, or, the science fiction-y speculative things that you might hear out there, but it's a lot less commonly adopted, or there's more trepidation there than I thought there was, because we are in this tech bubble where we're all adopting it and using it and, trying to enrich our process with it. And a lot of other people don't think that way.
Yeah, and when we think about marketing teams, which is kind of where I want to focus, I know you're working with a lot of marketing teams on your side. You're fractional VP of marketing right now. When it comes to marketing teams, what's different about AI compared to that Web 2.0 phase where, there was a lot of changes happening. You got the internet, got Web 2.0. Now AI is another phase, but how should marketing teams be thinking about AI a little differently compared to maybe those other phases that you mentioned?
Yeah, so after that first phase of internet or not was the Web 2.0 phase, right? Which is what we were talking about before in the early odds, where the internet went from read-only to read-write, and either your applications were on board or you were on board kind of writing your own internet story. The MySpaces and Facebooks and all of social media and things like that kind of came about. And then every website went from just read about this information to interact with the forum, fill out a survey, do all these things, and then demand and lead generation spawn from that, right? So a company that didn't invest in that two-way conversation ended up being read-only, and those were kind of left in the dust. If you didn't evolve your website, if you didn't evolve all of your materials to start to gather information from everyone that was reading, knowing who's actually touching your content, you just didn't have the right information to survive against your competitors. So yeah, that's now the new flavor. You're not integrating AI into the platform that you're developing or the process that you have, or even, the education of your people. Those that know how to use the tools, that do have tools with it, are now going to be more competitive than those that don't. And we're already seeing that happening. A lot of what I talk about is assessing those tools as well, and just saying, like, look, if you have a tool that hasn't updated or added AI, or you look at their roadmap and they're like, no, we're doing the same thing over and over again, it's fine. You can discharge, because they're not getting you to work with them at that point.
And Ben, to give the audience some context about your role, I mean, we mentioned you're a fractional VP of marketing, CMO type role for organizations. So can you maybe describe the types of clients that you do work with, and predominantly the client that you're working with right now? You're on site right now. Like, how do you fit into the equation with smaller, like scrappy marketing teams?
Yeah, so what I've decided to do at this phase with what I consider the paradigm shifting again, I feel like we're on another wave of like Web 2.0 with the advent of machine learning and AI, is to take all of my demand gen and GTM experience, go-to-market experience, and just jump back into the forefront of cutting-edge AI. So now I'm a fractional VP for early-stage AI-based startups because I just love the tech. I have a lot of experience taking vast platforms to market and everything that goes along with it, and it's just fun. I mean, it's fun being at the forefront of tech here. So those are the kind of customers that I'm working with. It's brand new tech. It's still got kind of the startup vibe, but it's using cutting-edge machine learning tech that I'm still learning about every day. There's researchers that can run mental circles around me with what they're building and what they explain, but it's just fascinating to be part of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned being a part of it, and how fast it is moving, and then how like you're jumping back into it, bringing some of your experiences forward, and then you're kind of meeting AI head on, so to speak. Based on some of the interactions that you're having with clients now, like what are you seeing as far as those challenges with adopting AI, like on the onset? Like what are you seeing right now?
So the other thing that I'm doing, aside from joining these early stage startups as a fractional, is just working with other colleagues like me that are still working in legacy SaaS platforms, agencies, other businesses, right? And I speak with them, and they're kind of in like one of 5 camps around AI. Either one, they're being forced to come up with a plan like, hey, use generative AI to increase productivity, reduce costs, whatever it takes. Or they've already lost some cost, they've lost budget, they've lost resources, they've lost tech stack, and they're like, hey, it's not coming back. I now have to use generative AI to do more with less, which is every marketer's favorite phrase from like the last couple of years. Or you might just know that it's coming. You might be reading leads of your organization and say, well, I need to block in to the next quarter or the second half of the year with proactive planning to improve things, because I can sense that I'm going to lose something. And maybe if I come in with an AI plan, that'll show some innovation and I can really leap ahead. Or maybe you're in that camp that I talked about before, where you're like, no, I don't want to use AI. And if that's the case, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. But you're roughly in one of those camps, and that's what I'm hearing now. Those are the main challenges, and all of them kind of are leading to the same road. Okay, I know I got to do this. What do I do? How do I adopt it? Like, what's my process to really make this stick? And not only that, but prove some form of ROI, so I can either get some more investment to do these things, or divert some of my old tech or resources or whatever it takes to kind of make this happen.
When a lot of companies are a big piece of adapting to AI is like responsibility. Like, who does this fall under? Who's going to champion this process? And companies are trying to figure out how AI looks like in an org chart. When you're talking to these companies, is AI something that like is everyone's responsibility? Is it something where you have some like cultural champions? Is it a formal role? What does that often look like in the companies you work with?
Yeah, so that's a great question because some large orgs, I'm seeing them hire almost a chief AI officer. That might be a new role that starts to exist, where they sit with or alongside or under the CISO. But depending on the size of the organization, there's a few things that happen. The first, if it's like enterprise, mid-market, even at almost any size, the most critical step is meeting with that CISO or the CTO, whoever owns your tech, your platform. Figure out your AI policy. Don't just jump in and start using stuff. A lot of people want to do that, and even I say, hey, experiment. It's always good to think about that. But it's like, oh, by the way, the most critical step is, are you allowed to do this? Are you messing up your infrastructure? Decide what data you can expose to an LLM. If you have your own private LLM, and then say, okay, we'll take all this content. The content marketer is responsible for owning that and putting that in. And the CISO is responsible for screening it. Maybe the comms people are responsible for the voice and tone and everything like that. But you do need to lay out what's called, a generative AI policy that explicitly states what's going to go in and then what's going to come out and provides limits. Part of that policy, or next to that, is your ethical AI policy. And that's where you say, okay, not just with the data that we want to expose, from a customer standpoint, from an internal data standpoint, how do we want to ethically use this? Will we use this to come up with code? Will we use this to solve customer problems? Will we use this for this or that or the other thing? You might not want to publish the full thing, but you have to think that through, because that's going to also place limits what your employees and your resources can actually do with the AI. Once you do have that set, then it's like, okay, who's going to own prompting? Who's actually going to, so swap to the baby, super cute. Who's actually going to design the prompts? Are we using canned prompts, or are we using, reusing prompts and things like that? So that usually, we're talking about marketing things, that can totally fall on a marketing team at that level, but those two top level policies do need to be in place. If you're an SMB, if you're like a really small team, well, that's overkill, but sit down and download a template that someone else has done. At least do the exercise, because it will pay off in the long run. And then we're at the point now that customers are going to start asking, hey, what is any of my stuff in your LLM, or how'd you come up with this or that? What are you exposing? Just like we have kind of privacy and cookie policies and, data policies, AI and LLM, they need to be right in there with those.
Yeah, and Ben, you talked about the possibility of a chief AI officer, and you talked about the policies to get in place before you even begin to integrate AI. And these are some steps that folks probably haven't even thought of. And it brings me to a term that I know we want to get to today that you mentioned on one of our first calls, was this concept of AI readiness. And you introduced that to me. I hadn't heard that before. I thought it was very interesting. And that's what we want to explore here further, so people can take away what that might mean for them and their smaller team. It seems like that could be an answer or a process to go through for a smaller marketing team. But what is AI readiness?
It's funny, Tristan, that came up. It started to come up when I was chatting with you and with some other colleagues around it, and I kept calling it AI readiness. And you were the first one to say, where did this come from? And background about me, I come from a military family. I'm former military as well. And in the service, this theme of readiness is always there. It's a state, the shorthand way of saying, okay, we're ready in case conflict erupts, right? Everything that we have, our systems, our equipment, it is ready to deploy and go and, potentially go to battle with. So that's the same concept that I think about when I think about a paradigm shift, like going to AI. How ready are you to handle it? How ready are you to accept this new reality that AI is going to be part of your systems, part of your go-to-market, part of your process, part of your employee training, all of this stuff. Now, what that concept really means is, walking people through with just a process of asking those questions. Part of it is, hey, what's your AI policy? How have you thought through, who's going to own all these pieces? Everything that we just said. The next layer is, just a classic people process tech. Okay, now let's think about your team that you might on your marketing team, your sales team, everyone that has to touch this stuff. Who is ready to deploy AI, who's already using it maybe, that you need to audit and find out. Maybe someone has their own version of ChatGPT spun up. That's now unauthorized based on your policy, so you need to figure out how to govern that. Or maybe you have someone on your team that's like, look, I don't want anything to do with it if this is not part of my job description, we need to have conversations. So there's that piece. The other piece is just the process, walking everyone through, okay, how are we doing our go-to-market? Great example here is on the marketing side. You can quickly accelerate just go-to-market campaign planning, leveraging AI. Everything from writing a campaign brief to getting that rounded out by different role and dispersing that to a content manager, a designer, copywriter, all of those things. A lot of this stuff can get accelerated without even having to expose much data to the LLM. And then finally, the tech. What can we displace that legacy with new AI? Or what tools do I currently have that are implementing and integrating AI into it? And again, as I said before, if you look at your tech stack, who's doing AI and who's not, because they're sending you a million emails about it. Those that aren't, you probably want to take a second look at them and say, look, if they're not going to innovate here, I probably need to start looking at someone that is. That way they're at least forward thinking and they're going to adapt with you. So that whole thing that I just talked about, kind of from top to bottom, I'm glossing over a lot. This is very high level. That kind of is what I call AI readiness. And it's just a full-on assessment that you need to walk yourself through, you and your team through, to make sure that you're ready to reap those benefits.
One of the most interesting elements of what you just walked through is that you put tech last. Is that was like the final step in that, whereas I think a lot of teams go tech and then they work through. Walk me through, like, why did you do that? What was your thought there?
The main reason that I usually put tech last is because of the people. People are always first, because in SaaS and software sales and everything, even when I plan my go-to-market process, I always think of the buying committee first, because at the end of the day, these are the people that are going to use it. So if you start with tech first and you start with policy first, now you're walking into your team and you're saying, all right, everyone, pencils down. Stop using your rogue version of ChatGPT. Now we're using, this.ai, and that's going to solve all your problems. And then you find out, oh, actually I hate AI, or oh, I already have like 35 prompts saved and I'm an expert in this, or oh, that's not actually how the process works when we actually go to market. And, this person has that, the other person has all these approvals. So you need to start there first and adapt the tech to the people and not the other way around. Obviously, that way you get the most use out of your tech. Anyway, everyone's just happier.
And Ben, when did that term come to mind? Like, when did you say, all right, we kind of need to bundle this concept of AI readiness into, a package? When did it become apparent that that was needed?
Around like the fifth conversation. I kept watching people do this same and kind of talk consistently and asking those same questions. And each question and each step that kind of laid out opens the door to a few more questions, right? And at the end of every one of those, when I say, hey, people, who's on your team and how ready are they to use AI and what's their comfortability? Maybe we do a survey, maybe we ask them what tools they're using and things like that. Process, how does this currently work? Where are the little hooks that we can find, improvements using AI tools? All of those lead to either a gain in efficiency, a gain in budget, or, a gain in some way back to the ROI conversation. So then you, the CMO, the VP, or anyone, that's what the board cares about. They don't really care about, hey, my designer's happier with AI. They want to know we increased productivity 25% because I'm in one of these camps that I'm being forced to, and I'm ahead of the curve. So that came up because I kept having the same conversation and needed a shorthand way to say what it was.
And I'm interested to know what these conversations you're having. I hear the good things that come out of an AI readiness process, but then in this other side, I have like some marketers, right? They're on these small, scrappy teams, and they're like, "That's great, Ben, but I don't have time to go through this process. It's changing so quickly. I need to constantly test a new tool or whatever." Like, how do you balance that conversation? Because I know you're interacting with these folks all the time. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's funny. I was at a dinner once where I started to say this, and in the dinner, 30% of the people were like, "Oh God, I'm behind." 30% were like, "Yeah, I know AI tools like that GPT spun up," and the other 30% were like working in the tools and like well advanced. So for those that feel like they're behind or feel like they don't have time, it really is just kind of a back to the basics moment. Look at where your process is. Look at where you're getting hung. If you're finding it that you don't have time, just think about where you're spending most of that time, where those time sucks are. I guarantee there's likely a tool that you can throw at that process and help accelerate. I really haven't run into one instance where there's not one. A good example is even around like PR and customer interviews and case studies. I now, instead of, actually writing all of these things out, which I love, like locking myself in a room and writing and coming up with good copy, I now just do an interview. Or I'll just do like a speech to text, because now with AI, the transcript is there. I can auto toss a transcript into a tool. It spits out the summary. It summarizes everything. It knows my tone and words because I have it trained. And now I can spit out either a customer case study, a PR pitch, or just, an amazing interview notes that converts into a blog post or other content. It's like a 30-minute process. It used to be a week. So if you're getting hung up in some of these other areas, just change your mindset into how you can solve this problem with AI. I know it's one of those, feels like a one-size-fits-all answer, but really it is just, trying to think about where the time suck is and solving it from there.
So if I'm a marketer hearing that, I'm like, man, I got to jump into things more. I got to test a bunch of stuff. And you look out there and you find some like long Excel list of 450 AI tools that you need to try today. And I know for us, I'll speak for myself, I've tested more software tools than I ever have over the last year, but I've also ran into way more junk software than I ever have before. So with that world of so many things, like what does your evaluation process look like? How do you approach that to use your time efficiently, but continue to learn?
Luckily, I have the flexibility in my schedule where I can do that. And I actually have a team of other marketers that are just like me. We're kind of fractional, we're kind of consultants, where we get together and we're actually putting together a go-to-market process where we're like putting ourselves in marketer seats that are doing the same thing. Everyone's testing or looking at, there's an AI for that or some list that they got from someone like me that's curating the list. And we're just saying, okay, so if I had to launch a business from zero to, fully in market, starting with the brand identity and messaging, then I'm, maybe setting up a website, then, taking all these steps all the way through to sales and success, we're evaluating groups of tools, like stage by stage, and kind of regurgitating that out. And that's what the real benefit to AI readiness kind of is. Now, everyone can't do that. Everyone doesn't have the time, but there are sites out there that can kind of help shortcut you if you don't want to, listen to me on 35 more podcasts about that journey. I highly recommend there's an AI for that. It does have a good rating system, recommendation system. There's Red AI that also does things like that. And then just being in other kind of AI community groups, you can find people like me that do have the time to have invested and have tested. I can say though, I agree, Jacob, there's a ton of junk out there that looks like it's a good skin, but it's really just a fancy prompt generator. And I kind of just weed those out and kind of keep pushing.
Nice. And there's like two pieces of this. There's the technology side, which you spoke to, but then the other piece is the application side. And this is, I think, especially relevant to, you mentioned like two groups of people, one being my CEO just told me I need to use AI broadly. And I'm like, all right, I'll use AI. And then the second group is someone that listens to someone like yourself and says, this is really important, I need to implement it. But either way, tech is a piece of it, but like you said earlier, it comes last. How do you prioritize applications and know where to focus your attention? And you mentioned several there, but what does that look like? What advice would you give someone thinking through that?
I really think about it from like a problem solution standpoint. One of the biggest examples that I bring up when I talk to marketers is like something like a legacy piece of tech that you feel like is evergreen. And it's usually like a map, like a marketing automation platform. Everyone, at a certain stage has one. They're $50K a year. They are. We all know it's sitting there and full of all these prospects that have filled out forms or downloaded content, and you're never going to talk to them. But at the end of the day, it might do like three things. It might do email really well. It might do web personalization really well. And it might just warehouse, extract, transform, and load and automate that database really well. Most people are using like 15% of that functionality. And it's just what it is. So now you're spending, $50K for really, a $7,000 piece of thing that does email really well. So analyze that. If you're not using every part of that system, then that's when you go out and evaluate a tool. It's like, okay, this one thing that you just really need. There are dozens of tools that are now like stratified that do one thing very well. You can find web personalization software that's AI based for, the cost of a license per user. Email nurture for license per user. Every one of those things you can kind of pick apart and find a solution for. Yeah, you might have to sit through sheet demos. You might have to make sure it works for you. You can also listen to, recommendations, but it is kind of worth it, because if you walk into a room and say, look, we realize we're using 15% of this $50,000 tool, but I found something for like $5K a year. And with that, savings of $45K, that's almost an FTE, or, some more ad spend or something like that, you can repurpose it.
Yeah, and Ben, you mentioned a couple cases there. You mentioned the marketing automation platform. Obviously, there's big cost there, and there's a small percentage of what most folks are using. Jacob, you and I deal with that all the time. You're like, why do we need HubSpot at this amount? And it's like we wrestle with that.
I'd like to note I didn't specifically name Annie, because I don't want anyone to come after me.
I hear that, but I just went for it because it's number one deal. But that said, it's like you mentioned, that's an area that you could look at. You talked about, obviously the transcript process and kind of repurposing those deep interviews, which is really what we're doing here. It's a big process of our own. What are some of those other areas that you've seen work really well for maybe a head of marketing to tackle and say, hey, this is an area that I could test. I could carve out a piece of our workflow and really enrich that with AI. What have you seen work beyond those two examples?
Probably. That is just a loaded question. I could talk for an hour about this. I don't want to take too much time. There is a lot of two main areas I'm just going to touch on, because I could go deep on a lot of these. But one is sales enablement. There are now a ton of very well-vetted tools that help with ABM account discovery, enrichment, and deployment to kind of circumvent prospecting for your sellers, provide them sales intelligence and insight. And then I actually just saw a demo of one that integrates with Gong and Zoom, will run a transcript analysis of the calls, match the call notes with the talking points that product marketing advises, and then produces a score by seller and shows, hey, this person's on brand, this person's selling, and it ties it to their win rate and their rev. That's huge. And then this is like a per user license seat thing. It's not this massive platform. I think that's huge. And I think that sales and marketing enablement are just going to mesh together using these new AI tools. And you're hearing sellers start to use some of these, like Clay and some of the others that are out there. They just love the tools. It takes less out of the marketers too. So marketers are like, I can't govern this email copy and stuff. But it's like, well, if you feed it the right stuff and train it the right way, and based on your policy, you're good. Let it run with it. It's going to work out. So that's one massive category. If you're a CMO, you could probably start there and then get another quick win with your sellers and make everyone happy. The other, I'd be remiss if I don't mention this, it is just extending reach through localization. Like, again, I'm a fractional. One of my main clients is LibDub. We're seeing a ton of advertisers and marketers starting to use this tech for a couple of things. One, you have like the keynote speech. You have, a speaker that really matters, that is delivering a message, and you need to localize it in a million languages. This can happen in minutes now with the tech. The other is, you have a recorded ad or you have a recorded message that you need to then personalize. So now if I'm a seller as well, and if, at the end of my day, I'm recording 35 videos and I'm saying, hey, Brian, hey, Jen, hey, Joe, all of that stuff, I can now just type in and have it say whatever I want and kind of automate and batch process that whole thing and then send those out. So a lot of these tools out here to kind of just make these little pinpoints, right, of life easier. But those are the first two that come to mind. I could keep going.
Yeah, I love those additional examples. And with those positive use cases where you're seeing a big impact on AI, I'm curious to go the opposite way and understand, what's the downside if I don't go through a process where I am evaluating whether we're AI ready or not? Maybe I'm moving too quickly as a marketing team. What is the downside of that?
Well, the downside is simply that as we've seen these shifts happen before, like I laid out, those with internet, those that adapted Web 2.0, those that did it. History tells us when a new wave comes, you're either on board and making it to the next, or you're just not. So if history is teaching us anything, it's better to be in that camp than not. It's a little fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's a little funny for me to drop that, but that's kind of the way that I see it. But also just think it through. Let's say that you just don't You're a person that's like, no, I'm going to draw my lines and I'm not going to learn these tools. I'm not going to, integrate my process with this. Everyone else is going to be like moving faster than you are. And they're going to have a shorthand and they're going to learn how to do prompts and they're going to learn to get the most out of these tools. And then you're still going to be, cobbling things by hand, which is respectable. The art form isn't lost. It's just that it's not going, the speed to market is not going to be as fast. And that's what we're starting to see now is, hey, launch faster, iterate faster, test faster, because now we have all of these tools. I'll take one example that's not in tech, right? You guys probably heard about a breakthrough that AI had the other day, where it discovered like tens of thousands of antibiotic permutations that lab techs just couldn't do. It would have taken like literally 100 years. This thing crunched through it in a week. And now we have all of these antibiotic resistant drugs that can be, essentially switched and extending the lives of millions of people. So if you're in the camp that you're like, no, let's keep doing it the hard way, let's keep crunching the numbers, that's fine. It's respectable, but this is tech that can really help people and move things along.
So we've been talking about AI readiness, and you really just described like AI hesitancy. But on the other end of this might be like AI recklessness. And so I think a lot of people might fall in that third category. What's the danger on that side of things?
Yeah, I think about that all the time, especially with working with the guys I looked up here. I was talking to someone the other day, and they're like, oh, so that's the technology that's going to dismantle democracy. And people's like, no, well, not this one. Maybe someone might try and, deep fake their way into dismantling it. But the safeguards are in there, and that's the only thing that you can do. There are obviously some groups that, various governments are forming to try and safeguard AI. And I do think it needs to be regulated to some extent. I'm interested in seeing how far that's going to reach. I am very tech-minded, though, so I'm more like, hey, let us figure it out. And maybe we'll talk about regulation, but I'm interested to see how it's going to develop. That's why I started with the policy, though, too. You need to have those two things in place. An internal policy on what you're going to feed in, and then that ethical policy on what you're going to get out and how are you going to use it. And that really does need to mirror, obviously, your own values and ethics and your core mission as an organization, but also like what do you want your customers to see? Do you want your customers to look at the code you write and say like, oh, it's all AI gen, or do you want your customers to look at all your copy and all your creative and everything and say, oh, it's all AI gen, like that doesn't really feel distinctive or whatever. Like that's how you kind of make that determination. And ethically, how are we going to use it? For instance, that lived up, we actually wrote that safety policy that we have on the website. I wrote that with the machine learning team. We thought through the usage of the platform. It came down to one thing. You don't have permission to dub someone, you're not using the platform. And they have two people on that providing that data. So the hope is every platform kind of self-governs, and then every user of the platform also self-governs and has their own policy.
Yeah, and you mentioned ethics there, Ben. That's something we talked about in our first call, which I don't feel a lot of people are even factoring that into the equation as much, where it's just like they're moving as quickly as they can. Yeah. How important are ethical considerations and just policies overall in AI readiness?
They're critical. When I originally put this thought together of like the readiness sequence and process, the policy came at the end. Because everyone wants to get to, oh, how can I get a quick win, or how can I improve this or that? And then I had to switch it and say the policy, it has to start that way. Because unless you've got enough buy-in with like your CISO, your CTO, CEO, just your entire org saying, hey, this is how we're going to use this, you could quickly, just go off the reservation and start making things that don't matter. And here's what that looks like. If you're exposing all of your email data, PII data, right, to an LLM, you or me or someone that's just trying to get the job done might say, okay, this is cool. This is helping. We're doing well we set out to do. We're being cutting edge. Your CISO or your IT people or your GDPR officer if they found out about that, they'd be losing it. And then legal, and not to mention everyone else, right? This is data that's leaking out of our internal systems into an external system that is, performing another function. That is a clear violation of GDPR, especially with PII. So unless you're starting there and really thinking through it, you could just be setting yourself up for failure, which is why I think about the policy, the ethics first, and then everything else left.
Selfish question from me, Ben. When you're writing these policies and you're putting these together, it's such a new phenomenon that I'm trying to figure out, are there specialists on the legal side that are working together to put these policies in place and to kind of draw some of the lines around, restrictions and ethics and so forth? Like, how are you getting these policies in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first policies that I started working with were based on others that we had seen. One of the first ones was Wired put together a comprehensive ethical AI policy that they had produced. And so leveraging that, you kind of can use it as a template and talk with your internal team. The people that know this stuff really were, usually they'll have, you showed at your org, right? You have a GDPR or compliance or a PCI or a data officer, right, in there. And they're going to help you kind of guide that with your legal team. And then obviously your CISO and your CTO, whoever is governing the systems and the security of the system, all of that stuff needs to kind of come together. And then you're kind of laying that out. But in terms of the template, just think about, in the simplest terms, what are we going to feed in? How far are we going to go back? How is data deleted? It's almost like any data governance, like agreement that you need to put together. And then what is the output? Who gives access to that? How is it used? How's it going to impact the customer? Obviously, it's the last one.
Got it. And Ben, I'd like to leave you with this last question. You've described AI readiness and the process that's involved and the teams can follow there. But with the pace of how things are changing, can companies ever really be ready? Is it a yes or no question, or is it something you always have to monitor?
That's a good question. The readiness, I call it more of a process than an exercise rather than like a yes or no outcome, because it really is an assessment that then leads to a plan that then leads to just, moving things forward. It's just kind of an action plan to get you to closer to where you want to be. The outcome is increased ROI. But the process is probably ongoing. And yeah, Tristan, you nailed it. The pace at which things are moving. You could do an AI assessment or an AI readiness assessment this year, and then next year, there are an advent of new tools or a lot of the smaller tools that I was talking about. Maybe they're all merged and acquired together or, absorbed by another tool. So you'd have to do it all over again. So I think it's really an ongoing piece to make sure that you're, adherent to using cutting edge tech. I think a lot of people think about that when they think about their tech stack. It just happens to be now with this paradigm shift, you can get so much more out of these tools than you did before.
Yeah, perfect, Ben. Well, thanks a lot for introducing us to that concept of AI readiness. I really liked it when we talked originally, and I think it'll be something that we could point to, at least working with our clients. We're getting a lot of questions, obviously, how we're using AI, how can we use AI more, how can we pull back, and it's just a constant state of flux, and I think this will give us something to lean on a little bit and say, hey, here's a conversation we had with Ben. Gives you an indication of how to really manage this process, because like you just said, it's more of, activities that aren't really going to stop. It's not a yes or no question. We're going to have to always stay on top of things. Yep. So I appreciate that. And really to close things up, and just want to give you an opportunity, like where should people go to find more about yourself, the companies that you're working for, and any AI work that you're doing?
Yeah, if you're curious about the localization stuff I talked about, that's LiptUp. It's liptup.ai. Can't say enough good stuff about them. It's really, really interesting and innovative. If you want to follow me for more of this AI readiness stuff and then subscribe to some of the publishing that I'm going to do with this group I talked about, just hunt me down on LinkedIn. It's Mojo Mogo, MOJO, and you can find me there, blogging, podcasting, and doing all that stuff. Happy to help.
All right. Awesome. Well, Ben, thanks for being one of our first guests on Creative Operations. Can't think of a better topic to roll with in the early stages than AI readiness. So it's been a pleasure. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creative Operations, the podcast for B2B marketers who want to get into the weeds and figure out how to get work done. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Creative Operations wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or access all episodes at marketsindemand.com/creativeoperations.